Hello, everyone. Welcome to Learn with Mr. Lewis. Today we are looking at the 1781 Siege of Yorktown. It's the last major battle of the American Revolution. It's George Washington's greatest triumph, but what many don't know, it's also his greatest tragedy. So let's get some background. January 1781, Washington is spending the winter in New Jersey. Things are not going splendidly. His main job at this point is keeping an eye on Sir Henry Clinton, who is the overall commander of the British Army, and he's in New York City. Washington would love nothing more than to take back New York City. He lost New York City back in 1776. It was his greatest embarrassment, his greatest failure in the war, and he would love nothing more than to take it back from the British. At this point, Washington has the professional army that he had been seeking. This is an army that could have stood up perhaps to the British back in 1776. It's different. It's different. But here's the problem. They're hungry, they are cold, and they are not getting paid. They are ill-equipped, and the Continental Congress is not providing what Washington needs, and they really can't, because under the Articles of Confederation, the Continental Congress can't tax. And so it's difficult for Washington to get the things he needs for his men. They also haven't been doing a lot of fighting. The last major battle they had was way back in the summer of 1778 at Monmouth Courthouse. And since then, there's been a lot of sitting around, a lot of idleness, and that's not great for an army. In fact, in January, there are two mutinies that take place, and Washington has to put down both of them. The second of those, he actually executes the three ringleaders of the mutiny, and the result of that, no more mutinies. But what Washington really needs is the French fleet, and he's been hoping for it, he's been begging for it, and it hasn't come. And he needs that French fleet he hopes to take back New York City. So most of the fighting in the last couple of years have been going on actually in the South. And you've got Nathaniel Greene and Daniel Morgan on the Patriot side up against Lord Cornwallis and Bloody Band Tarleton. And Tarleton and Cornwallis have been chasing Greene and Morgan all over the Carolinas. And Greene and Morgan have been successful at staying out of a major conflict because they know they can't win that, and at the same time depleting the resources and frustrating these British commanders. There are a few bigger battles, but it's mostly just hit and run kind of stuff, little stuff, guerrilla warfare stuff, and it's driving Cornwallis crazy. Let's talk a little bit about Cornwallis. I think Cornwallis gets a little bit of a bad rap as the guy that loses at Yorktown. I remember growing up thinking that, but Cornwallis is really not to blame for Yorktown. In fact, Cornwallis is probably the best general that the British have, and it's a good thing that he is not the overall commander. Clinton's who you want in charge if you're an American. Anyway, I guess the greatest compliment I can give to Cornwallis, he reminds me a little bit of Ulysses S. Grant when Grant was in the West, and he's sort of the leader of the secondary army, winning battles like Vicksburg. And Abraham Lincoln says of Grant, he fights. That's the compliment that he gives Grant. And I guess you can say the same thing about Cornwallis. He doesn't always make the right moves, the right decisions, but he fights. He is hardcore. All right. So Clinton's in New York, and he doesn't seem to be that interested in leaving New York. He has 4 houses there. He has a housekeeper that is also his mistress, that is also the wife of another British officer, Mary Badley, and it's a party scene in New York, and Clinton definitely partakes of this and doesn't seem to be too interested in leaving anytime soon. So that leaves Cornwallis, for the most part, on his own. There's some communication, some letters between the two of them. Cornwallis informs Clinton that he is very low on supplies. He needs to be resupplied, and he needs some direction as to what to do next. He's suggesting that Clinton come south and assist him. Clinton's got the bulk of the army. Cornwallis has about 8,000 or so. Clinton suggests, hey, you know what? Let's stop this chasing around the Carolinas. I need you to head to the coast and wait for me. And I'll be bringing you more supplies, and I'll be arriving shortly. And so, with that in mind, Cornwallis follows the orders of his commanding officer, and he heads to a small port city in Virginia, Yorktown. The war is not popular back in England. The king and parliament are struggling to keep the population on the side of this war that has gone on a very long time, much longer than anyone had thought, and is extremely expensive. And there are a lot of people that are thinking, you know what, just let them have their stinking independence. It's not worth it. The French Navy is hanging out at this point in the Caribbean, and the commander of this fleet is the Comte de Grasse, and he's protecting interests of the French in the Caribbean. This is also causing problems for the British. They are attacking British warships there, but it's not what Washington wants. But Comte de Grasse, he informs him, hey, you know what? The fall is hurricane season. I'm going to be heading north, and I am more than willing to assist you, but you're going to have to go where I want you to go, and it's not New York. I want to hit the Chesapeake. I want to hit Yorktown. Well, Washington can see that this is the best option, and so he rounds up and coordinates with the other French commanders. That would be Lafayette and Rochambeau, and they start making their way to Yorktown. Along the way, Washington finally gets to do something that he enjoys, and he gets to stop at Mount Vernon. He hasn't been there in 6 years since he took command of the Continental Army way back in 1775. And while he's there, he meets with his stepson, 26-year-old John Parke Custis, whom they call Jackie. And Jackie has been begging to get in the military, but Martha and George have held back. They understand the risks and the dangers, and they don't want him facing those. Let's give a little background on the Custises. So Martha was married first to a man named Daniel Parke Custis. He dies, and they had 4 children together, but 2 died as infants. The other 2 were very young at his death. And when George and Martha get married, Jackie, the older of the 2, there's also a daughter that they call Patsy. They're just 4 years old and 2 years old when George marries Martha. And George really sees them as his own children. George and Martha don't have any children of their own, and he loves these kids. He raises these kids. They are to him his own children. And I guess maybe the best evidence of that is the fact that Jackie names his only son George Washington Parke Custis. And so that shows the connection between the 2 of them. The daughter, Martha, that they call Patsy, tragically, she suffers from epilepsy, and she dies at age 17 in 1773. So this is 8 years before the events that we're talking about here at Yorktown. Anyway, Jackie is able to prevail on George and Martha. George also has a sense that, hey, this thing might be over here. This might be it. All right, fine. You can come along and you can come with me to Yorktown. And that's where they head. Cornwallis is no idiot. He knows that this is maybe not the best place for him to be hanging out, and that it's a place that he could easily be trapped. So he starts building some defenses just in case, these cannon forts known as redoubts. And there are a series of them that he builds around Yorktown. He also is in constant communication with Clinton in New York, and he writes to Clinton and says, hey, are you sure you want me here? This is maybe not the best place for me to be. It's a vulnerable position. And Clinton writes back and says, yes, stay there. I will be there shortly with reinforcements. You can count on me. And so Cornwallis makes the mistake, I guess you could say, of counting on Clinton. And that's not going to be a good move. The French fleet reaches the Chesapeake. At that time, Clinton does send a small fleet to try to support Cornwallis at Yorktown, and these 2 collide on September 5th. It's known as the Battle of the Chesapeake. It's a brutal naval battle. It lasts 4 days. Washington is able even to watch it from his positions there surrounding Yorktown, and the French prevail, and the English fleet is turned back, and this gives the French absolute control of any ship entering or exiting Yorktown. And this is an even bigger problem now for Cornwallis. He writes Clinton again. He's like, hey, I need this help that you've promised. And Clinton promises the help and tells him to stay put. And Cornwallis makes it clear that his chances of leaving are getting slim, because he can see what's happening. His scouts are seeing Rochambeau and Washington coming and closing in on Yorktown. Once they get there, there's a big discussion. George Washington wants to make an all-out attack on Yorktown. But Rochambeau suggests a different plan. He says, you know what, let's take our time, let's besiege the town, let's create parallel trenches, almost like the tightening of a noose, and let's slowly work our way in. We'll dig a trench, we'll move forward, we'll dig another trench, we'll use our cannons, and we'll hit Yorktown. And that's the plan that they go with. This siege begins on September 29th. These cannons begin firing. This is a greater concern now for Cornwallis. He again writes to Clinton. He again begs for help. Clinton again assures him that it's coming. A couple of weeks later, the attack on the redoubts, these are those cannon forts that Cornwallis has built, begins. This one of those attacks on redoubt number 10 is led by Alexander Hamilton, famously. And it's at this point that that Cornwallis writes Clinton and says, you know what, don't bother. It's too late. If you come now, you're not going to make it. Cornwallis doesn't get this letter because he has finally set sail, but it's not going to matter. It's too late. On October 19th, Cornwallis surrenders. And this is an embarrassing moment for Cornwallis, so much so that he doesn't even attend the actual surrender ceremony, although he does about a week later have a meeting with George Washington, and where they discuss things, and it's a cordial meeting, I guess, although we don't really know what was said in this meeting. Clinton, of course, realizes that he has made a grave error and that his delay has caused what is likely the end of the war. The war is so unpopular back in England that, yes, Yorktown is going to effectively end it. The loss of 8,000 soldiers, it's just not going to be something that the British people are going to support anymore. In the meanwhile, Jackie, okay, John Parke Custis, George Washington's stepson, has fallen ill. We're not sure what the disease is. It may be dysentery, it may be typhus. They call it a camp fever. And he is very ill, so much so that he's taken to the home of one of Martha's relatives that's nearby. And it's there that tragically Jackie dies. And this is just a devastating thing for George and Martha. And when we talk about triumph and tragedy, this is the tragedy. It's something that George never gets over. Jackie has 4 children that have survived. He's got just one son. That's the youngest of his children. And the 2 youngest, the daughter, Nellie, and the son, George Washington Parke Custis, whom they call Washi, they actually end up living with George and Martha at Mount Vernon, and they're raised there. And George Washington Parke Custis is the one who eventually builds his own home and plantation. It's known as Arlington House, right there across from Washington, D.C. in Virginia. And of course, it's his daughter, Mary Anna, who marries the famous Robert E. Lee. And so that becomes their home. And of course, that becomes Arlington National Cemetery when Union troops during the Civil War start burying bodies in the Custis Lee plantation. So that's Yorktown in a nutshell. Great triumph, but also unbelievable tragedy for George Washington. And if you'd like to learn more about it, I highly recommend the series, The Revolution. Episode 10 chronicles much of what I've talked to you about today. It's called The End Game. Also, if you're a teacher and you want to use this in your classroom, I do have a video guide for this available on TPT. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. Hopefully you enjoyed this and that you learned something from it. So learn with Mr. Lewis. Do you want to see some more of Mr. Lewis? Of course you do. You're addicted. There's a great video here, another great video here, and you can subscribe right here. Do you want to see some more of Mr. Lewis? Of course you do. You're addicted.